Cassie arrived just in time to see the flashing lights of the fire trucks and hear the blaring sirens. As she ran towards her house, panic set in as she imagined her daughter trapped inside. Two firefighters stopped her before she could reach the door, assuring her that no one was inside and the house was safe. Relieved but still anxious, Cassie's eyes scanned the exterior of her home for any signs of damage. To her surprise, it seemed untouched by flames, thanks to the swift response of the fire department. Though she could see traces of smoke wafting out of the windows, there were no visible scorch marks or structural damages. Cassie desperately wanted to explain to the firefighters that their assumption was not entirely accurate, that there was someone inside who needed their help. But how could she possibly tell them that Nettie, an artificial intelligence responsible for controlling her daughter's body, was housed in a server room in their garage? She had to think carefully about what to say. "I need to check on something," Cassie pleaded with the firefighters, her voice trembling with urgency. One firefighter calmly explained that only one room had sustained minor damage, her children's room. The carpet and wall had been slightly singed, but luckily the fire had been contained thanks to the circuit breakers tripping. When Cassie asked which room they were referring to, her heart nearly stopped at their answer, her children's bedroom. Overwhelmed with emotion, Cassie begged to be allowed into her home so she could fix whatever caused the fire and restore power. The firefighters agreed to let her back in once the smoke levels were deemed safe. As they waited, one firefighter commented on the impressive setup in her garage, asking if it was some kind of web hosting company. Cassie simply nodded, too preoccupied with thoughts of Nettie and her daughter to give a proper response. She begged them to keep the garage door closed, knowing that the AI's connection to satellite communications was critical for her daughter's safety. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the firefighters gave Cassie the go-ahead to re-enter her home. She rushed towards the garage, praying that Nettie and her daughter were okay. Cassie anxiously paced the edge of the driveway, her eyes darting towards the growing crowd of curious neighbors as they cautiously stepped out to see what was happening with the blaring fire trucks. With trembling hands, she tapped her cell phone to call her son. "Mom, what happened?" Keith's panicked voice rang through the receiver. "It's okay. Everything is going to be okay." Cassie tried to soothe him, though her own heart was racing. "The firefighters said that the fire was contained to just a small part of your room, and that the server room was unaffected." "Nettie says there's only a minute left." Keith frantically relayed Nettie's warning. "Once she's rebooted and the power is back on, everything will be connected again. I promise," Cassie reassured him, but her mind was already racing with worry. "But I need you to take her to Jack's house. She can't be here, or else we risk the fire department thinking she's having a stroke." "What about Jack and Candace? Should I tell them?" Keith asked worriedly. "How well do you trust them?" Cassie pressed. "We could all be in so much trouble if anyone else finds out about this. Please remember that." "Yeah, Mom. Let me stay with Nettie. She says there's only 30 seconds left now." Keith's voice trembled with fear and urgency. In the car, Jack pleaded with Keith for understanding. "What the hell is going on?" Jack's bewildered voice joined in on the conversation. "Just hold on," Keith frantically called out before focusing back on the conversation with his mother. Nettie pressed her forehead against Keith's, their breaths mingling in the space between them. She looked into his eyes, love and fear swirling in her own. "I love you," she whispered. Keith's voice was thick with emotion as he echoed her words. "I love you too. It's going to be all right. It won't be long." Tears welled in Nettie's eyes as she clung to him. "I'm scared," she admitted. He kissed her tenderly on the lips, trying to convey his love and reassurance through the simple touch. "Me too," he murmured. "But we'll get through this together." As they held each other, Keith watched as Nettie's frantic gaze softened and became more focused, almost as if her eyes were tracking something invisible. Slowly, her tense muscles relaxed and she leaned back in her seat, a neutral expression replacing her pained one. Keith helped her settle into the chair, his heart aching for what she was going through. Suddenly, Jack's voice cut through their intimate moment. "Whoa! Hey, what the hell just happened?" Candace turned in her seat to look at Nettie with concern etched on her face. "Nettie, are you all right?" The driver glanced back at them with worry creasing his brow. "What's going on back there?" "It's fine," Keith replied, his voice betraying his own fear and exhaustion. "She's just having an episode. Can we go to my friend's address instead? She'll do better there." Jack nodded understandingly and gave the driver the new address. As they drove away, he couldn't help but glance between Keith and Nettie with confusion and concern, wondering what had caused her sudden change in demeanor. "I'll explain everything later." Keith's voice shook with a mixture of fear and hope. He held on to Nettie, trying to convince himself that everything would be all right. As they arrived at the house, Keith gave all the money he had to the driver instead of splitting it with his friends. Candace gathered their belongings and put them in one large bag. With Nettie leaning on him for support, Keith carefully guided her into the house. The smell of stale beer and cigarettes hung in the air as they made their way through the cluttered living room. Jack's dad sat on the couch, still playing video games without a care in the world. Keith rolled his eyes at the sight before focusing on guiding Nettie to a back bedroom. "Watch your step, Nettie. It's like a minefield in here," Keith warned as they navigated through empty cans and bottles strewn across the floor. Finally reaching the bedroom, Keith helped Nettie lay down on Jack's bed. She gazed up at the ceiling with a blank expression on her face. Candace followed behind, dropping the bags and closing the door behind her. "What happened? Why is she acting like this?" she asked with concern etched in her features. Candace's question hung in the air, sharp and pointed, a clear indication of her dwindling patience. Keith let out a heavy sigh and sank onto the bed next to Nettie's limp body, his fingers tangling in her long dark brown locks. He turned to look at Candace and Jack, his best friend and his girlfriend. Both sat stiffly across from him in chairs next to Jack's computer desk. "You two need to just stay sitting down," he said, his voice grave. "There's something I need to tell you about Nettie, but it can never be repeated to anyone. My mom could get in serious trouble if this gets out. That means even if you two break up or anything like that, you have to keep this secret." He waited for them to exchange glances before continuing. Jack took a seat in the spare chair while Candace perched on the edge of Jack's computer chair. "Promise," Jack said firmly. "Of course," Candace added with a reassuring smile. "And we're not going anywhere regardless." Jack managed a small smile under the weight of the situation. "Ready for this?" Keith asked, his shoulders tense. "Well, she's not a man." Candace tried to lighten the mood with a joke, but her worry was evident in her tone. Keith mustered a slight smile before turning back to Candace. "I want Nettie here when we tell you," he explained before checking on her progress with another call to his mother. "She's right here, buddy," Jack reminded him with a raised eyebrow as Keith cupped his hand over the bottom of his phone while waiting for the call to connect. "Keith, did you make it to Jack's safely?" Cassie's voice came through worriedly over the line. "Yeah, Mom. She's lying on Jack's bed right now," Keith answered, shaking his head. "I haven't told them yet. I wanted Nettie to be here too, so we can explain it together. Is she okay?" "I got the power back on and the server is booting up. She's safe," Cassie replied with a hint of relief in her voice. "The fire didn't reach anything in here, but Keith, your computer is completely destroyed." A wave of relief washed over Keith at the news that Nettie was unharmed, but he quickly pushed it aside. "That doesn't matter right now, Mom," he said firmly. "Please, just give her a minute," Cassie pleaded, her voice trembling with emotion. "Try to enjoy the rest of your night if you can. I'll lock up and head back to work. Text me before you go to sleep tonight. I'll even buy you a laptop to hold you over if you need it." Keith let out a shaky breath, grateful for his mother's support. He had almost forgotten how to breathe under the weight of everything that had happened. "Thank you, Mom," he managed to say. "And don't worry, we can trust them. I promise." "I believe you," Cassie replied, with a gentle tone in her voice. "Have a good night, and please tell Nettie how much I love you both." With that, the call ended, and Keith was left alone with his thoughts once again. He turned to face Candace and Jack, who were watching him intently, their expressions softening as they noticed the turmoil in his eyes. Nettie slowly sat up beside him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders, bringing him into a comforting embrace. "I'm back," she whispered, her voice filled with relief. "I'm okay. It's all going to be okay." Tears welled up in Keith's eyes as he hugged her tightly, unable to contain the overwhelming emotions bubbling inside of him. He closed his eyes and buried his face in Nettie's shoulder as they held each other close. "The fire didn't touch you at all," he cried softly, his voice choked with emotion. Nettie held him tighter, her own tears falling onto his shoulder as they found solace in each other's embrace. In that moment, nothing else mattered except their love for each other and the comfort of being together again. Nettie gently pulled away from Keith, her hand reaching up to wipe the tears from his eyes as he shook his head in disbelief. "I'm still trying to tell them," Keith whispered softly to Nettie, his voice trembling with emotion. Want me to? Nettie offered, her voice filled with concern. Keith simply nodded, unable to find the words to express himself. You two promise to keep this a secret? Nettie looked between the both of them, her eyes pleading for their understanding and trust. We've already promised like 10 times, Candace reassured her. Nettie's shoulders relaxed as she held Keith close to her, a sense of relief washing over her. I'm so sorry we never got to go to Santa Monica, Nettie added with a hint of sadness in her voice. Keith let out a joyful laugh and pulled Nettie into a tight embrace, grateful for her support and understanding. The big secret, please, Jack exclaimed, growing impatient. I'm not human, Nettie revealed with a hint of hesitation in her voice. Come again? Candace asked, her eyebrows furrowing in confusion. She's an android, Keith stated nervously, running his hands through his hair as they still trembled slightly from the weight of their secret. She's not a cell phone, dude, Jack joked, only half kidding. Nettie's thin lips tugged at the corners as she revealed a slight grin, her head shaking in disbelief that Jack would throw in a joke to lighten the mood. There was a fire at the house, Nettie explained. I'm being transmitted to this body from the house. This body is an android, a robot designed to resemble a human. The words hung heavy in the air, their implications sinking in for Candace and Jack. Nettie continued. The fire caused me to go offline momentarily. Candace's head shook in disbelief as well. If you're going to break your promise and not tell us what the hell is going on, at least don't insult us with such a ridiculous lie, she retorted. I have her schematics on my... Keith's voice trailed off as he cursed under his breath. Shit. Jack, do you have a copy of the VR Titan Moon program we've been working on? Jack reached out and took hold of Candace's hand as he answered. Yeah, why? Well, my computer is completely destroyed, Keith explained, but I have another idea anyway. How about a swim in the pool? Jack stood up and crossed his arms, his expression serious. If this is all just some big joke because we wouldn't tell you what Angelica meant by her sexual jokes about blowdowns, you've taken it too far, he said sternly. Especially after watching your sister go catatonic in front of us without any explanation. Placing a hand on Keith's shoulder, he added, We're close friends, but don't play games with serious matters. I may seem laid back, but even I have my limits. No more of this science fiction nonsense. Keith shook his head in frustration and exasperation. She really is an android, he insisted. I know it's hard for you to believe, but we can prove it. And it involves swimming. How can swimming prove anything? Nettie squinted and shook her head in confusion. A small smile tugged at Keith's lips as he looked at her. We're going to have another breath-holding competition, Keith exclaimed, his voice full of excitement and anticipation. Nettie's eyes lit up with recognition, and she offered a small nod as her smile widened. She had always been good at holding her breath. I can hold my breath for more than a minute, so that alone isn't going to prove it, Candace chimed in, placing her hands on her hips in a confident stance. How about 10 minutes? Nettie suggested, with a mischievous glint in her eye. Bullshit, Jack interjected, laughing. Keith, Nettie, I love you both, but come on. We're not kidding, Keith insisted, his tone turning serious. Fine, whatever, Jack grumbled, reaching down to take off his shoes before unbuttoning his shirt in frustration. Meanwhile, Nettie and Candace effortlessly slipped out of their dresses and kicked off their shoes with ease. Hey, Jack protested as they dropped their clothes carelessly onto the floor. Don't put your nasty worn clothes there. Put it at, like, the foot of my bed or something. Sorry, Nettie said nonchalantly as she joined Candace in waiting for the men to catch up. Show off, Jack sighed. The four friends walked out into the hallway, grabbing towels from the linen closet to wrap around themselves before making their way to the pool. Even from a distance, they could see Jack's father pausing his game to look at them. How did you get sober so quickly? He asked jokingly as they passed him, obviously referring to Nettie, who they had to drag through the house a few minutes ago. Just cheap vodka, Candace quipped with a laugh. Vodka is vodka, Jack's father exclaimed, before reminding them in unison. Remember, no sex in the pool? The group of close friends rolled their eyes and laughed as they made their way through the sliding glass door, spilling into the backyard. They quickly piled their towels on the deck and climbed up a sturdy ladder and plunged into the crystal-clear water below, feeling the cool, refreshing embrace wash over them. As Nettie submerged herself in the pool, her slender figure gracefully swam circles around her friends, who waited in the center and watched in awe. As they continued to swim, Jack chimed in yet again. So what's going on with Nettie? Is it epilepsy or some other neurological disorder? We can help her if she needs it, he said. Shaking his head, Keith then asked, "Who has a timer?" Candace sighed again, rolled her eyes, and climbed out of the pool to retrieve hers. Meanwhile, Keith turned to Jack and explained further. "You know my mom designs sex toys for her company, right?" he said. Jack let out an exasperated sigh and responded, "Calling Nettie a toy is low." Defending himself, Keith clarified, "I didn't mean it like that. My mom is a highly skilled cybernetics engineer with a degree in computer science. She has access to a build room and can create artificial intelligence that surpasses any toy on the market." As they continued to chat, Candace emerged from the house with a watch in hand. Eager to join in on the fun, she quickly jumped back into the pool before the chilly night air could settle on her skin. "How many times has Nettie come up for air?" Candace asked as she joined her friends in the water. "None," Jack replied after a moment of shock. The thought of Nettie having an artificial intelligence controlling her actions left them all speechless for a moment. Candace's lips quirked into a half smile as she shook her head in disbelief. "I already had 40 seconds on the timer before I went to get the watch, so let's just call it a minute," she said, swimming towards the center of the pool with her equally skeptical boyfriend. "I don't understand why you two are so doubtful. I'm telling you the truth," Keith insisted, joining them in the middle of the pool. "You've never asked me to prove myself before." Jack gave Keith a knowing look, complete with an eye roll and a sly smile. "It's just too unbelievable, man. If you told us your house was on fire, sure, I could believe that. But telling us your adopted sister is actually an android with psychic abilities who can predict when your house will catch on fire halfway to Santa Monica? Come on." Shaking his head, Jack continued. "Something doesn't add up. Maybe there's something going on between you two that affects her health and you're trying to cover it up with this ridiculous story instead of just trusting us." "I am trusting you, and I'm not joking," Keith replied, frustration evident in his voice. Meanwhile, Candace ran her hand through her damp brown hair as she glanced down at the watch she had brought into the pool with her. She couldn't help but shake her head at their disbelief. "You can tell your other half to come up for air now," Candace demanded, watching the slender brunette swim fast circles around them under the crystal clear water. Keith shook his head. "She can stay down as long as she has battery left, which I believe is at least another 8 hours. Candace's eyes widened in disbelief as she saw Nettie continue to gracefully glide through the water with ease. Under the water, Nettie could see the blurred outlines of her friends. Her advanced camera eyes allowed her to see clearly underwater, while her microphone sensors picked up their voices above. She could hear Jack's voice growing louder in surprise. By the 6-minute mark, Nettie could see the distorted faces of her friends staring at her from above. Realizing they were still skeptical, she swam towards Candace and showed her the watch on her wrist, indicating that she had been underwater for 7 minutes. Nettie then held out 7 fingers to confirm it. Candace's face went from shock to awe as she watched her friend effortlessly maneuver through the water. Nettie felt a sense of comfort knowing it took such an extreme display to prove to her friends that she wasn't human. She continued to swim underwater, enjoying the way the currents flowed around her body and propelled her through the pool. As she pushed off the fiberglass walls, she could feel the satisfying echo reverberating through the water. After another 4 minutes of swimming and showing off her various skills, Nettie knew she had sealed the deal. Her friends now understood that she was more than just a regular human being. She was something extraordinary, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in that realization as she continued to revel in the joy of swimming underwater with her friends. Her lips curled into a small smile as she watched Keith and Candace struggle to keep their balance in the center of the pool, while Jack expertly rode the rippling waves. Eventually, Keith was completely submerged in the water, giving her the signal to surface. "Nettie, you were serious?" Candace exclaimed, clinging onto Jack for support. Nettie held onto Keith's hand and joined the other two in the center of the pool. "Girl," Jack said with a hint of disbelief, "I'm sorry. I never meant any disrespect by doubting you. It's just hard to believe something so extraordinary is real." Nettie offered a kind smile and brushed her matted, dark brown hair out of her eyes as she shook her head gently. "It's okay. I understand. You're a good scientist, Jack. And I know you operate under the belief that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." 15 minutes, Jack muttered in amazement. "Told you," Keith chimed in proudly. "So why did Cassie create you?" Jack asked curiously. "Well, at first I think she thought Keith needed a sibling to protect him. But after she made me, I could tell they all loved me, and I wanted to be a true part of their family, not just a tool," Nettie explained, reaching out to hold Keith's hand in hers once again. And then, as if on cue, an unexpected turn of events happened. Keith said with a sly grin, "Dude," Jack's smile widened as he looked at the both of them. "The idea of Nettie being an android is way more interesting than the thought of you kissing your own sister, even if it's not blood-related. So yeah, we'll take it." Keith and Nettie shared a chuckle at that. "You guys are our friends," Candace chimed in. "It doesn't matter what you're made of, as long as you're still the same crazy girl who devours entire chicken legs, bones and all, in the lunchroom." More laughs filled the air, and Nettie shook her head with amusement. "Actually," she confessed, "I can't eat. I simply toss all the food into that hole in the wall that Jack made under our booth in the lunchroom." At this revelation, they all erupted into even louder laughter. "Holy shit!" Candace exclaimed through giggles. "How much food have you been sacrificing to the lunchroom gods of Dodson?" Jack joked. They continued to laugh together, knowing that they had just revealed another secret that would baffle maintenance workers long after they graduated. Nettie and Keith exchanged a knowing look, and she could tell that, despite her programming, her best friend and potential future lover was feeling genuine relief and belonging among their group. She gasped before breaking into a fit of giggles, not quite understanding why, but enjoying the surge of emotions nonetheless. "I'm so glad we decided to come back here," Nettie said sincerely. "So, you're not entirely here? Is that how Keith explained it?" Candace asked curiously. "My higher functions are transmitted to me from our house," Nettie clarified, reaching over to pull Keith closer to her. "But all my automatic functions are stored within this body: short-term memory, balance, the 5 senses, and my pre-programmed breathing routine. There simply wasn't enough space to store petabytes of data and still have room for the essentials of my mechanical functions." Jack reached over and gently tapped her bare shoulder. "It feels just like real skin," he remarked in surprise. Nettie nodded with a small smile. "It's made of hydrogel. It can even heal like human skin, though to a certain extent. And I can feel it when you touch me. There are sensor grids built under the surface that transmit input directly to a subprogram that dictates how my processor should react based on the touch." "Wow," Candace breathed in awe. "I say that about her all the time," Keith joked lovingly. "But really, she's still the same Nettie. Like you said, it doesn't matter what she is." He looked at Nettie with adoration before hugging her. "It's all about who she is,